G'day and welcome to In the Pocket podcast with Callum and Levi. I'm Callum and that's Levi.
I'm Levi. Yeah, mate.
Yeah, just two blokes that start with myself first and enjoy a bit of training, a bit of jits and a bit of Muay Thai in my past. Love MMA. Been long time in the making, kicking off this pod. We've been talking about it for far too long. What better way to kick it off than with the new Paramount deal? Over to you, Levi.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's definitely a time. It's the pinnacle of the sport as we're seeing it in 26. For myself, been watching the sport for a couple of years, been doing jits now about 6 months, boxing, been around it my whole life. So just makes sense to jump into like-minded blokes and just have a bit of a yarn about the sport that we love. So yeah, what a card to start the year off, eh? What an interesting one.
Exactly.
Very
Oh,
interesting
mate,
couple
drama
start.
right up to the death as well from what I'm hearing with potentially Justin Gaethje already getting pulled out with a staph infection on the neck. It's all pending at the moment. I don't know if you've seen much about that.
Mm,
Doctors potentially
I've
pulling him
seen.
out before the weigh-ins. I'm sure there's a certain Armenian licking his lips.
Yeah, you can definitely bet that Armin's keeping a very close eye on that. I did see even before all this news sort of came out, I'd seen an image in his camp videos where you could kind of see something on the neck that resembled staph, but you know, nothing's official until, as we saw, Kayla Harrison got pulled off pretty quick, and there wasn't really a official acceptance or sort of acknowledgement of it by the UFC. So we know that obviously a lot goes on behind the scenes, and we're not privy to it. But when we get to Sunday, we'll find out if he's actually fighting, which hopefully he is. But what a shakeup that would be if Paddy's trained this whole camp for Gaethje and he ends up fighting Armin.
I
What
mean,
a switch up that would be.
personally, I'd love to see it. Obviously, Arman, as
Mm,
everyone knows, is the rightful number one contender, and he's been overlooked for this fight. We've spoken about it in length off camera, but
mm,
I really love to see it. Him and Paddy got a bit of bad blood as well, which build
mm.
increases the build up for the fight. I really wish we did have that press conference. Gaethje's almost looking like he's maybe checked out a little bit this week with some of his interviews he's done about performance bonuses and not earning enough. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I believe at this stage we're going to get Gaethje Paddy, so we'll stick on
Mm.
with that. But if there's any last minute changes, we'll be sure to fire up another pod just before, I'm sure. Anyway, we'll kick off
100%.
with what is sort of your predictions surrounding the main event with Paddy versus Gaethje for the interim lightweight title at 155 pounds.
It's a hard one, right? I mean, you look at Gaethje, you look at his career, and his only losses have really been to some of the top contenders. Eddie Alvarez, Dustin Poirier,
An exciting
Habib.
exciting fact I read yesterday: he's never been finished in the same round twice.
I did see that all of his losses are in different rounds.
Yeah,
So it's maybe he wants to keep it that way. Hopefully,
maybe.
obviously he wants to go out on top, but I think for Justin, it's hard. He's at the tail end of his career. This is his last run at gold. Even if he wins this fight, he's got a tough battle ahead of him in Ilya. So it'd be interesting to see how this fight plays out. In terms of game plan, I think Paddy wants to get a finish.
Mm.
All sort of fight week, all of his videos, he's been talking about basically leaving Justin never the same.
Yep.
But I think I think Paddy is a very dynamic fighter. I think he's going to thrive in the exchanges because he's very lengthy and big for the division.
Mm.
I think Gaethje has the wrestling advantage, but I think Paddy has the jiu-jitsu advantage. And if Gaethje gets rocked, which we've seen he can get rocked and he goes down, I think we might be looking at a submission from Paddy Pimblett. I think people
Yeah.
underestimate his grappling. People
I,
think that he's terrible, but I think he's got it in him
I
personally.
think something that I really liked in the Michael Chandler fight with Paddy is when he smells blood, he was a lot more calculated. We've obviously seen him
Mm,
evolve through his UFC career. He is undefeated in the UFC, even though he's had a couple of questionable ones there against, say, Jared Gordon. But against Chandler, he waited and he really waited for that perfect moment to start initiating his own wrestling because he probably was the weaker wrestler coming into it. Afterwards,
mm,
maybe that perception's changed for people, but yeah, as soon as he smelt blood, and originally I believe he was going for the submission, got the back, Chandler rolled and Paddy got into the mount, and then he just started absolutely firing elbows, and he could smell the
yep.
end was near, really maturing as a fighter. So I do agree with you in that sense. I think if Paddy's gonna win, it's gonna be by sub. But wouldn't rule Justin out just yet. If we're moving on to predictions, I personally think the fight's probably got maximum 3 rounds in it. I don't know if you share the
Yeah,
same. I don't see this going the distance, and I
yeah,
could
me
see
too.
either bloke winning. I think something that Justin sort of has in his favor is people are saying he's looking at retirement. He's past his best days. He's beat Fazeev only twice. That's his last two fights. He's ranked in, barely in the top 15. Bear in mind, he is a fantastic striker. Doesn't
Mm,
necessarily hold the same skill level on the ground. I like to, from that last fight with Justin and Fazeev, there was a moment in the first round where Fazeev sort of landed in a mounted triangle. And I remember saying to myself, if that was the likes of Islam, who was the champion at the time, even Ilya, who's got short little stubby legs, but I guarantee you he'd be able to finish a triangle from there because his jiu-jitsu is fantastic. Paddy is definitely going to be finishing a triangle from there. We saw what he did to Bobby
yeah,
Green in their fight. He's so
yeah.
slick. You know, Justin's a counter wrestler as opposed to an offensive wrestler, so I don't see Paddy getting taken down, put on his back like maybe an Islam Makhachev would. But yeah, it's,
Mm,
it's going to be interesting. I think we're going Justin Gaethje if he can engage early and hurt Paddy in the first round or two and turn it into a bloodbath. He's got a real shot of, as the name of
mm,
this podcast is, being in the pocket, hitting him with
yeah.
the beautiful uppercuts that he has. He also throws those short kicks inside the pocket that not many fighters can do.
Mm,
I could see him catching Paddy. Paddy maybe overlooking him slightly, thinking, he's the young buck coming up. But I heard a comparison that he's like the young Darren Till, who obviously got stopped by Jorge Masvidal with very similar sort of what am I trying to say here? Temperament and coming into the fight thinking he was invincible, which is great, but also got to have respects for these legends. But yeah, I'm thinking maybe Gaethje midway through the third round is going to hit him with an uppercut and upset, and then I don't know.
yeah. You can't count him out. And we've seen this multiple times over. You look at the likes of Pereira and Volkanovski, these guys have still got it in their prime. Yeah, they've maybe taken an L or two, but you're still looking at the guys who were running the divisions. Gaethje's been in the lightweight, you know, golden boys for a very long time.
Mm,
His resume is glowing, and you know it's going to be a very interesting fight. It's funny that you mentioned the third round. That's sort of the one that I've got in mind. I don't think the fight's going the distance. I just can't. These guys want violence, and now there's a little bit of bad blood boiling.
mm,
Like you say, I think Gaethje's definitely getting towards that. You know, he's leaving the fight game. He doesn't need to be a trash talker. You know, I think it's regardless, he's still going to put it all out there. He's going to leave it all out there because he knows this is his last shot. Similar to a Pereira or a Volk,
mm,
nearing the 40 mark. We got to go for it now. It's this or it's nothing. And you really can't count him out. I think if it does get to as you said, name of the pod in the pocket, I think that Gaethje's going to be slamming those uppercuts on Paddy's jaw. But if
mm,
Paddy's smart, he'll use his range. And when Justin is going for those chopping calf kicks, he's going to try and counter him with a right hand
mm. So
or
official
a power
prediction.
shot. I'm saying round three submission from Paddy. That's what my prediction is.
Any
And
any
it's
submission in particular?
feel like it's a rear naked choke, man. I don't know.
Mm.
I just the way that he got those hooks in on Chandler,
Yep.
he, like you said, he smelt blood and he was there straight away, wasted
Yep.
absolutely zero time, sunk the hooks in, got that
Yep.
body triangle on, and it was just there. We saw that, as soon as he gets a good strike on an opponent, if he can't get that submission, he will go to ground and pound. But I think that, at the same time, we've seen Gaethje get out of some very interesting predicaments. His Granby rolls are,
Do agree.
you know,
Yep.
pretty impressive. But if he gets hit with a big head kick or a big right hand,
Yep.
you never know. What
Nice.
about you? What's your prediction?
Look, I think given everything surrounding Gaethje this week, the staph infection's a big one for me. I like to lean on the Benoit Saint Denis fight against Poirier, and that's another reason I think it's only going 3 rounds. Having had staph myself through jiu-jitsu, which is prevalent in that sport, being on antibiotics kills you. I think he's got 2 strong rounds in him, but I do see Paddy surviving and weathering the storm. If Paddy can take it slightly deeper than the second round, I reckon he's just going to have too much for him. Justin's going to gas. I could honestly see Paddy just finishing him with a triangle. I liked when
Yeah,
Oliveira and Gaethje fought, and he nearly got that reverse triangle, but I just think that triangle for Paddy is his absolute weapon. He likes to throw up that flying
yeah,
triangle. But anyway, we'll move on to another fight. We'll be on the main event all day. I know it's a massive fight. On to the
yeah.
new co-main, O'Malley versus Song Yadong. Something I'm very excited
Yes.
for.
Yeah, it's shaping up to be a good fight. I
Yep.
think
Mm.
the Sugar Show has definitely taken a hit, but you look at the guy's career and his losses are to Marab, like in recent history. He
Yeah,
still had a generational run,
I agree.
maybe the controversial win over Piotr Jan,
He's a
but
big game player, you could say.
he
You know.
is, and Song Yudong, very tough opponent, very
Mm.
crafty. He's at a good team, got Uriah Faber in his corner. He's had some good fights. He, was definitely not a slouch against Piotr Jan.
Mm.
He has put up some very tough battles, and the odds here, I think, reflect that pretty well. Sean is the slight favorite, and to be honest, I would agree with that. I think Sean is a precision counter striker, and I think that we're going to see that for 3 rounds. I can't see him
Mm.
knocking
Yeah,
Song Yudong out.
I've got Sean 30-27 by decision. I just
Yeah,
think he's
even
too
at
much.
29-28.
I think there's too
But
much on the line for Sean in this fight, and he is just such a
mm,
high level fighter. Obviously, he's coming off a submission loss from a north-south choke from Marab, which was an insane performance, and that was when Marab was
mm,
invincible before, as you said, Yarns kind of, managed to figure him out. But yeah, I like Song. I just think he's a top five gatekeeper personally. He's a
mm,
genetic Asian specimen of a human being, and he's a gun. He's constantly improving, but that division has got to be right now with the movement in lightweight and inactivity from Ilya and Islam moving up. I do believe that yeah, it's the most skillful division. So I'm going Sean O'Malley 30-27 decision. I don't know about you agree
yeah,
or yep.
yeah, I'd agree with that. Look, he's been in there with some tough competition. He's been in there with
Mm.
Marias, Corey Sandhagen. As we said, Piotr Jan, he did get a good win over Henry Cejudo. But again, even with the eye pokes, that was a bit of a questionable one. So
Yeah, and I think if you look at Henry Cejudo at the back end of his career, he's not the same Henry Cejudo that was Triple C,
no,
the double champ. He should have never come out of retirement. And I think a lot of people, that's my belief, and I think a lot of people share that. He just wasn't the same. And
yeah,
we saw that against his most recent fight with Peyton Talbot. So yeah, I'm liking that co-main a lot more than the women's
mm,
fight. I mean, I hope Amanda versus
yeah,
Taylor does get rescheduled because I'm not a they are both very exciting women at the top of their game.
yeah.
Be interesting to see if Amanda comes back and she's got any sort of similarities to how Henry had that time away from the game, the inactivity, the ring rust.
Mm.
Anyway,
Well,
we'll crack on. We'll move on to one of the women's fights, Natalia Silva versus Rose Namajunas, former champion.
mm,
Silva looking very hungry. One of her more recent fights, Alexa Grasso, she absolutely
mm.
outclassed her. Her kickboxing and speed was really the difference there. Not sure if you caught that one, but
I did. Yeah, it was a masterclass, really. There's not much more that you can say.
nah,
And
especially after Grasso, had those wars with Shevchenko that were quite
yeah,
close. So,
absolutely. I mean, the odds definitely sway towards Natalia Silva. And, Rose has been in the game for a long time.
mm,
She's had some absolutely amazing fights, former champ. But I think when you get a win like that over Alexa Grasso, and I think she's kind of taking a bit of a dive at this end of her career. Unfortunately, it's sad to see. She was a very good champ, but we are seeing the new wave of women's MMA, and I think Natalia Silva in the flyweight division is the face of that. Um, you know, it'd be a very interesting fight. I think after this fight, if she wins in good fashion, I think there really is no one else for
nah,
Valentina. I mean, she's already fought the number one contender in Fioro, and I think that Natalia's done enough to earn a title shot after this. So
I agree.
maybe June, July. I mean, Shevchenko fought. It was earlier, sort
Mm.
of mid to late last year. But I still believe that
Yeah, I
she's
believe Shevchenko fought on the same card as Islam against Wei Li, where she just, she's too
yes,
big and too strong. And She really impressed me with her wrestling there. I'd be interested to see
Yeah.
in this fight if Rose engages the wrestling because I do think Natalia has
Mm.
the edge in the striking just with that speed. Not that she's predominantly a wrestler, but Grasso was outclassed on the feet. So it'd be interesting to see if she has got some tricks up her sleeve. But I've got 30-27 decision from Natalia Silva again.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at her career in the UFC, she's just been on an absolute tear through the
Mm.
rankings. And I guess that's sort of a good segue into the next fight, which is Waldo Cortez Acosta and Derek Lewis,
Oh yes.
who Cortez Acosta has been on a bit of a tear in the heavyweight
Mm.
division. He fought, I think it was 5 times in
Yeah,
2025 with 4 knockouts.
he did. Obviously,
And
the last one slightly controversial with that eye poke.
very, very controversial given the current status of the heavyweight champ, and he
Mm.
obviously was very
And
vocal about that.
yep, and that being his teammate that was to get poked, who was you
Yes,
could argue was winning that first round.
you could, and it was a very interesting one. I remember sat there watching the TV, being like, "There's no way that this is the timeline that's playing out." But a very impressive heavyweight. He's
Mm.
fast, but he's big. He's got that size. With these heavyweights, there's dynamite in the hands,
Yeah,
and the
I think
same goes for Derek Lewis.
I think it's safe to
You
say
know,
we were not going to predict this one's going the distance.
no, I'm saying it's a round one knockout, and it could honestly go either way. But I'm locking in a crafty vet pick in
Mm.
Derek Lewis. He dismantled the likes of Talison Teixeira, who was an
Mm.
up and comer from the Contender Series. Not saying that Cortez Acosta is on the same level as Talison because he's the number 5 ranked heavyweight contender in the world, and he's definitely earned that spot. But you can't count out Derek Lewis. This guy has been in wars in the heavyweight division for a very long time. He is older, but in these heavier weight classes, you can kind of get away with it a little bit. You
Mm.
got a
I agree.
38-year-old Jones
I
and all
just,
that,
yeah.
but
To be honest with you, we've got this new gen coming through, and the old guard that's staying around, it's IQ. They're coming in.
mm,
Yeah, they've got all the skills, but they're all professional fighters. The level
mm,
and the IQ of Derek Lewis is, in my opinion, underrated. I think at times his fitness has shown, and that's where he's lost when he lost to Tai
yeah,
Tuivasa, who's obviously that's another issue with fitness there in today's game. We'll see how he goes in the Sydney card, but yeah, I've got Derek Lewis coming out with a very quick start in the first round.
mm,
Potentially could get knocked out himself because Cortez Acosta has got some serious power, but I think Derek Lewis has got the highest testosterone and highest. I
yeah,
think he's got the most knockouts in the UFC in heavyweight as well.
I do believe so.
So yeah, I'm going with Derek Lewis round one.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the loss that Cortez Acosta took against Pavlovich was a decision. So that
Mm.
maybe the cardio could be a problem. We don't know, but
And that's where
we
we'll
will
see if that
see.
experience
Yeah,
comes in. They're only both. Oh, Cortez Acosta's only getting better. He's only gaining more and more
yeah,
experience. So yeah. Anyway, here's one that's on the undercard, but I'm sure people are going to be tuning into this one for sure. And it's fantastic that with this new Paramount deal that the undercard will be available as opposed to the pay-per-view where you'd only get the main card. But we've got Davison Figueiredo Figgy, who is the underdog against Umar Nurmagomedov. What are your thoughts
Mm.
there? Given recent history.
Well, I think that a lot of people will be counting Figgy out. I think he's the rightful underdog in this fight. Whether it's a minus 1400 favorite to Umar being a
Mm,
fair odd, I don't know. I really think that, we've seen in his previous performance against Mario Batista, Batista made Umar look a little bit more human than I think we initially thought. Obviously after the loss from Marab, Umar is hungrier than ever. He did
mm,
have a good decision win over Batista. Um, but Davison Figueiredo is one of the most decorated vets in the game. He is 38. He did have a very, very close decision with Montel Jackson in his
yeah.
previous fight. It
Was
was,
Jackson ranked 15th at the time? Is that correct?
I think he was the number 15
Yeah, that wasn't
ranked.
his finest performance, but you've got to remember he's coming back off tearing an ACL against an absolute machine in Sandhagen, who
Yes.
probably beats everyone outside of Marab and Umar at the moment. I'd love to see him
Yeah.
rematch Peter Yan. he's a significant wrestler, and I'll be very interested to see the landscape of bantamweight now that maybe people are going to start utilizing that same game plan Jan had. But then how does
Mm,
Marab also, change up his style potentially to get
mm,
himself back to championship status? But yeah, I'm with you on that. I do think I like Umar everywhere in this fight. I think he's a sharper striker. I think Figgy's got better counter striking and a lot more power. That's the only place I think Umar really lacks is having power in his hands. We've seen him get knockouts with his kicks. He's the next gen of the Dagestani fighter. So yeah, I've got Umar probably taking Figgy down in the second round, controlling him. I don't know if I see a submission. Potentially, I could
yeah,
see some sort of shoulder lock. I know those Dagestanis don't mind a Kimura from the top, so similar to the Islam
yeah,
Dan Hooker fight. But because Figgy does like to play bottom position. Obviously, he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He's a solid all-round fighter, but he's similar to Gaethje. He's coming to the end of his career. How realistic is another title run for him? He's been stopped
yeah.
by
Not very.
Jan. Or not stopped. He went to decision with Jan. He's been stopped by Sandhagen. Umar's hungry. He's coming out of that camp. He's probably also not happy with his performance against Bautista. Potentially overlooked him, coming off a
Yeah,
very close loss to Merab Dvalishvili. So yeah, I've got Umar by late round two finish, I think.
really.
I do,
Okay,
yeah. I think he's gonna stand and bang on in the first round, feel him out, and then I see him taking him down and getting a finish on the floor.
okay. Yeah, that's you know what that's a fair call. I think I'm going with Umar by decision,
Mm.
but I wouldn't count out a submission from Figgy off that bottom position. I think
I did
if
notice Umar's
Figgy,
susceptible
yeah,
potentially to leg locks. Is that sort of something you're hinting at, or are you thinking more of an
potentially,
education choke?
I just could see that Umar shooting for a takedown, Figgy with some sort of Granby roll, scrambles to top position, circles to the back. I just could see something like that happening
Mm.
because the takedowns from the Russians are very crisp, probably like the best wrestling in the game. But I don't know. I could see a submission from Figgy. It
Yeah.
could happen. It could happen.
It could happen,
But
one can hope, but the old boys versus the next gen really is what this
mm,
card it's the epitome of this card, UFC 324. Yeah, I'm excited as ever. And
mm.
we'll be back in the next episode to debrief how things go down. I think it's good
We
to
have
wrap.
missed a fight. We've
We
missed
have?
Arnold Allen and Gene Silver.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
right. We
we
have we have missed Arnold Allen versus Gene Silva, how do you think Gene Silva bounces back after his loss to a spinning elbow from Diego Lopez?
well, that's the thing, right? We're talking about an absolute barn burner here. We've got Arnold Allen who's coming off of some inactivity.
Didn't fight at
Had
all in
some absolute
2025.
wars.
Mm,
Yeah, he's had some absolute wars. The likes of Mosvar with Max Holloway.
mm,
This is a guy who he's stuck around in that top 10, and I think he deserves that position. And Gene Silva, we know he's wild. He is a very dynamic fighter who got extremely humbled by the likes of Diego Lopez.
mm.
And it'll be interesting to see if he changes his tune a little bit now.
Do you think he will
But
have matured a little bit as a fighter, maybe not be quite so reckless? I personally don't. I think we're going to
I
get the
don't
same
think
Gene
so.
Silva that's going to throw the absolute kitchen sink at Arnold Allen there. I
Mm,
think where Allen may have an advantage if he doesn't get clipped. Realistically, Diego Lopez survived that fight because he's got a granite chin. Outside of
yeah.
Max Holloway, he's probably got the next best chin. And
Yeah,
he ate some big shots,
he
and then
did.
sucked him in, and then hit him with that spinning elbow. It could have gone terribly wrong for him if his chin didn't hold up. But and analyzing Allen, he's a great counter striker. He's very crisp as well on the feet. I think if he can stay out of range and start to read how Gene Silver is attacking with those strikes,
Mm,
overextending himself potentially, being a little bit, not defensively sound and going for that knockout early. If he can weather the storm, I could see him once fatigue starts to set in, potentially starting to run away with it in that sort of second and third round.
mm,
But I think Gene Silver's jiu-jitsu is severely underrated. You know, that submission
Yeah.
he had against Bryce Mitchell with that ninja choke was absolutely fantastic. Do I think they're going to end up on the ground or in some sort of potentially in some sort of clinch situation where he could get it
Mm,
down, but it's going to be all around fireworks. You know, Gene Silver and the fighting nerds are always electric to watch. So yeah, I,
absolutely.
I think I've got Gene Silver by knockout in the first.
Mm, okay.
I think the ring rust for Arnold Allen is he's going to have a slow start, and I think we could start to see a slippery slope for Arnold Allen. I hope not, as a fellow
Mm,
British person, but you know, Gene Silver, he'll be back on that title run, I assume. But at the end of this, I got
yeah.
round one knockout.
Potentially, you can't discount what that loss would have done for him and sort of lit a fire up underneath him. And the same could be said for Arnold Allen, like all of that time off. It's got to make you want to clock into gear. I'm taking Arnold Allen by decision.
Ooh, I like it.
That's what I'm going with. I think he's got the skills necessary to weather the storm of Gene, and I think that Diego fight's given him a lot of good tape to sort of go off of.
Yeah,
I think as you said, his jiu-jitsu is severely underrated. That that fight
but
with Bryce was a thing
mm,
of beauty. If it does get to a clinch, just watch those elbows.
I agree.
That's what
I
I'm gonna
agree.
say for all that Arnold Allen.
I think
But either way, yeah, that's the feature fight for me on the main card. I think that's definitely one that I'm
I agree.
yeah. Obviously, besides the main event next to Song and O'Malley, I think that's the one that the fans need to tune into for sure.
I think so for sure. You know, Arnold Allen at one point, like you mentioned before, you know, he's only really lost to that top flight, that top competition, Movsar with his elite
Mm,
wrestling and insane pace. And then obviously Max Holloway, who, you know, honorary mention in the lightweight sort of talks with the outcome of Paddy and Gaethje. I could easily see him getting thrown back in the mix for, you know, if
mm,
he retains his BMF title against Charles Oliveira. I'd like to see him fight Arman for the number one contenders fight instead of this Paddy
mm.
versus Gaethje fight. If I'm truly honest with
Yeah,
you, obviously he's got that loss to Ilya, but I personally think he goes up 25% as a fighter at a lightweight compared to when he's malnourishing himself, cutting weight down to 45. Obviously he's moved up permanently now. But yeah, it's exciting times. It's exciting times in the UFC. I think this new deal, you know, there's a few changes going on. A couple of fighters are getting cut, new fighters getting signed, bit of a new model going on, changing of the guard in almost all divisions, really. In the men's,
mm,
heavyweights got the potential introduction of Gable Stevenson. I listened to his,
mm.
he was on Joe Rogan. You know, he wants to debut at the White House potentially. That's going to be interesting. Yeah, and you know we can move on and quickly just wrap up with a little bit about potentially the welterweight division and how that shapes up
Mm,
with the White House. Obviously, Islam's calling for Kamaru Usman. What are your sort of takes on that? Do you think that's an easier fight for him because Kamaru's getting older? You know, he's got those compromised knees. He's probably not the most deserving in current times. His resume is fantastic, just second behind GSP in the welterweight division, in my opinion. But yeah, how do you see welterweight shaping up? I think it's only right that we mention it in our first episode because it is just such an
absolutely.
exciting division, most exciting division in the UFC currently, I think.
Mm. I think if you give Kamaru Usman the title shot, then the UFC should no longer have rankings. You know, you can't underestimate what he's done for the sport. Like you said, one of the best welterweight champs. But Usman, he's not deserving of a title shot. He was inactive for a long time after the
Mm,
Hamzat fight. He did have a good fight with Joaquin Buckley, showed that he still got it. And, the Unk whooped the young guy coming up the division, which
mm,
was very impressive to see. But at the same time, we can't reward former champs just because the fact they're former champs if they're on a one fight win streak against, I think at the time he might have been the number eighth ranked contender.
mm,
You've got so many people in line behind Islam in the welterweight division. There's so many fights that can be made. And I know that it's a very controversial time for the division because you've got Ian Gary, who just beat Bilal,
mm,
which it was a decision. Yes. And then you've got Michael Morales, who knocked out Sean Brady. And you've got Carlos Prates, who knocked out Leon Edwards. So you've got three people in that sort of top five, top six, who are arguably
mm,
all sort of deserving, right? You know, Ian Gary, he's got the win over Prates, so you could argue that he's actually got more of an argument to the UFC and beat the former champ. And then you've got Morales, who beat the number one
Mm,
contender in Sean Brady. For
yes.
me personally, I think that there should be a true number one contender fight. Maybe not between Prates and Morales, because that's something that there can be a little bit more hype built around it. I think that you need to get Shavkat back in the mix, either against JDM. I don't think you give a rematch to Ian Gary. I think it's too early for that.
I
Even
agree.
a Morales Shavkat is
And I
another
think
good fight you can make.
from the perspective of the UFC, it's not the same as boxing and they're trying to protect their own, but they are somewhat more marketable unless you are a
Mm,
guy like a Prates that's, lost to Ian Gary, but it raised his stock. Everyone was like, wow, Ian Gary's IQ is insane, and Prates nearly knocked him out in that fifth round. I
yeah.
think I think for me, I 100% agree with you. Realistically, Islam's got Ramadan coming up. I think there's enough time to get a number one contenders fight going. I don't see Jack Della as part of that, just due to the way that he lost against
Yeah.
Islam in October, I think it was. So yeah, I think let's just assume that Shavkat's still out because he hasn't shown any signs of coming back from injury. I think Ian Gary has to be a part of that. I like Ian Gary, Michael Morales as a number one contender fight. Do I think both
Yeah.
guys are deserving of a title fight? Yeah, I do. Definitely.
Yeah.
I think Jack Della probably didn't take that much damage against Islam. He just got absolutely dominated. He's been calling for
Mm,
Shavkat. He needs a performance against a guy like a Shavkat Rakhmonov to be able to get himself back into the
mm.
mix and go, wow, he's just beat the boogeyman. If he was to do that, maybe he can fix what he did wrong, get Craig Jones back in his camp. They can, it seemed like they didn't have an answer to that half guard. He was hoping Islam would put him into side control so he could use his octopus guard to get back up. Wasn't the case. Islam and the Khabib Nurmagomedov team, they kept him in half guard, kept him down. It was a true display of dominance and positional control in on the ground. But Craig Jones is an absolute master of jiu-jitsu. I guarantee you he can
Mm.
find a way. You look at Volk in that first fight against Islam. Of course, Islam and his team have evolved, but Craig's only doing his instructionals with women now, so the Dagestani and the Muslim Brotherhood can't watch anymore. So yeah, we'll see. But I believe a number one contender fight needs to happen, and it needs to happen soon. And I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be good.
Yeah.
I think it's shaping
Absolutely.
up
Yeah.
well. I think at the moment and across a couple of divisions, including lightweight and welterweight, there's a bit of a shake-up, like you mentioned. The rankings, do they mean much? There's a way to put it right. Of course, it's a business and
Mm.
it's an entertainment business. At the end of the day, we've seen that with the likes of Paddy potentially jumping the rankings when he might not be the most deserving. You got Armin, but yeah, I think there's a way to put it right. We're maybe two fights away from reshuffling things and
Yeah.
having the right number one contender fight the champion, and I'm excited. I
Absolutely.
think I do think Islam is the number one at the moment in that division, but you know everyone's got a chin, as Justin Gaethje says. If the brain rattles off the skull, and there's some big hitters in that division, so
Then you're going down. You're going to sleep. Absolutely, man. I'm very excited to see what happens in the division.
mm,
Same with lightweight. I think that there's a lot happening. There's a lot of moving parts. I
mm,
think the most logical thing is wait until Max versus Charles, and you give the winner to Armin, and then
yeah,
that is the number one contender fight. The person who wins that bout will go on to fight Ilya in June, July. I think, if we get Armin Ilya at the White House, that would be an incredible fight. I think this storyline is only building it more.
mm,
And even if you know, either Charles or Max beats Armin and the other, and then gets to that number one contender spot, I think we're in for an incredible year in all divisions in the sport. So it's a very exciting time to tune in.
100%. What better time to tune into In the Pocket podcast? So
Absolutely,
we'll be
absolutely.
we'll
Only
be
up,
back.
onwards and upwards.
We'll wrap up there, but we'll be back next week with how the fight went down, and then looking into the card with Volkanovski versus Lopez too in Sydney.